don't know.
That's very left.
550.
Welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 43. The title of today's lesson is The Full Spectrum of Reverence and Love. And we are in the Practical Tanya by Rabbi Chaim Miller. We are on page 548, chapter 43. And you should have a handout in front of you. We're finally back to a one-page handout. So hopefully tonight's lesson will be back to the regular span of time. Actually, last week the recording ran out. I don't know if it was ran out of battery or something, but we got the last couple of minutes are cut off. It's only 54 minutes. And the conversation that Tanya has been having with us is, right, we're in this 10-week, we're in the middle of this 10-week, on the third week of this 10-week course, which is titled Reverence and Love, right? And these are two out of the 7 mitzvot timidiyot, the 6 mitzvot timidiyot, which are the constant mitzvot. So we have to constantly be doing it every moment throughout our day, right? Believing in God is one of them, right? And another 2 of them are loving and fearing God, having a love and a reverence, a proper reverence for Hashem. And so last week we spent quite a bit of time talking about these 2 different degrees of reverence that we can have for God. Right? Does everybody remember that? There was this lower basic reverence, which is sort of this basic, that's I guess what inspires Torah and mitzvot, that I do what Hashem wants. Another word we used for it was acceptance of the yoke, that I accept the yoke of heaven, that I do what Hashem wants because that's what Hashem wants and that's it. And it is blind acceptance. It's not this intense reverence of I'm in the presence of Hashem at every moment, but it's a basic submission to do Hashem's will no matter what. And then a higher level is a more intense reverence of Hashem, which is built on a meditation, etc. We touched on it briefly last week. I mean, we definitely discussed it. And this week,
Thanks,
and this week the Alter Rebbe is going to continue that conversation by number 1 talking to us about love, and number 2 talking to us about the relationship between the love and the fear that we have of Hashem. Right? So how we can have both a proper love, a proper ava, and a proper yira, both of these emotions, which are actually mitzvot for us to have at every moment of our day. We should always have a love for the Almighty and a reverence of the Almighty. And we're gonna understand how the 2 sort of work together. Okay?
Got it.
So the first question is like this. How does the spectrum work? In other words, I'll introduce it the same way the Alter Rebbe introduces it. The Alter Rebbe starts off by quoting Pirkei Avot, right? In Ethics of Our Fathers, the Mishnah tells us, Im ein yira, ein chachma, im ein chachma, ein yira. Sort of this catch-22, that if there is no reverence, if a person has not imbued within himself a proper fear of the Almighty, a proper fear of heaven, has not developed an emotion for God where he reveres God, then there cannot be chachma. You cannot properly learn Torah. V'mein chachma, but then it goes back the other way, that if there is no chachma, if there is no wisdom, ein yira, then there is no fear. Right? Then there is no proper reverence. In other words, in order to properly revere God, you have to learn Torah properly. Right? And the obvious question here is, how does that work? How does that work? It's a catch-22. So which one do I start with? Right? The Alter Rebbe explains that this is talking about 2 different levels of reverence. There's a lower level of reverence, and there's a higher level of reverence. Right? You have to start by evoking within yourself a basic reverence for God, a basic submission to God's will. Once you have that will inspire observance of Torah and mitzvot. Right? Let's see in the handout. I spent a couple minutes trying to find the right wording for it. Basic yira inspires Torah and mitzvah. Yira is reverence. Right? So everybody has a basic level of this is what Hashem wants, therefore this is what I do. It's a basic submission to Hashem. Right? Any Jew who does any mitzvah, despite the fact that they don't understand it, which hopefully most Jews I think are at that level already. They don't have to understand something in order to do it. Right? I mean, we know the same thing from doctors. Right? We don't have to understand everything that a doctor tells us to do in order to do it, right?
I do.
I know, I was just going to say Dr. What's her name?
Randall.
She needs everything to be... No, but on a serious note, Pam, you see someone goes into surgery. We don't know everything that goes into surgery. Right. There's a delicate. You understand the general idea. There's unfortunately, there's a yena machla, like a cancerous portion inside the person. You get the general idea. They're going to remove it. They're going to open up this part of the body. They're going to remove the whatever it is, and then But do you understand the different parts of the body? Why they're going from this part and not from this part? Right? They're trying to the different instruments that they're using. We don't, right? And yet you
only need to know that God is the surgeon and always.
Right, exactly. And as the Talmud tells us, that permission has been granted from the Almighty to the doctor to be able to heal. So we're supposed to trust doctors. I mean, not blindly. Don't get me wrong here. It doesn't mean you shouldn't question doctors. The Rebbe would always encourage people. I know we're going off on a tangent here, but it's interesting and it's similar here. I know that it's appropriate. It's applicable to some people here. The Rebbe would always encourage people that whenever you have a medical issue, right, as a proper believing Jew, in addition to just, right, of course we understand, we believe in Hashem, and even if you have the worst doctor in the world who usually makes a mistake on everybody, right, on you, if Hashem wants, they're going to do the right thing, right? Even though we have a belief like that, obviously in order to make a proper keli and to do things in the natural way, right, and then the opposite is also true, right? If you have the top surgeon in the world when everybody is perfect, if Hashem wants that they should mess up on a person, chas v'shalom, right? Then that's what happens. But at the same token, the Rebbe would always encourage that there's two things that should be done. They're actually very practical pieces of advice. Whenever you have a medical situation, the Rebbe would always encourage a person to go get a second opinion, and that second opinion should ideally be from a rofa yedid, which means a friendly doctor, like a doctor that you know, family friend, or not necessarily a family friend, but like a friend of an acquaintance or whatever it is, not somebody intimately involved with the same institution. Anyways, but back to the point at hand. So just like we trust doctors, just like we trust, I don't know, for those that don't trust doctors, what do you trust? A lawyer? You trust a lawyer? No, I mean you're a lawyer. A lawyer that you're paying to argue on your behalf. You sort of have to trust him. You don't know all the details, right? I would trust Jeff if I gave Jeff my case. Right, if you're a lawyer, right? And he was arguing on my behalf, I would trust him. Whatever, or an accountant, I'm an accountant, do your taxes. Of course we all ask questions, but there's a certain level of, this person has experience, this person knows what he's doing, he or she is doing. And we try to, right? So the same way, we try, certainly with Hashem, right? Not the same way, even 1,000 times over. With Hashem, we trust that if these are the mitzvahs that Hashem tells us to do, we trust that there's a reason for them, even if we don't understand it. But that level of observance is a very basic level of reverence, right? I mean, that emotion which drives that observance, everybody with me here? It's a very basic level. It's not actually a reverence for God. We're not actually doing this because we revere God, because we have this emotion for God, but rather just because, it's a general principle that I've established a long time ago in my life. I believe in God. If God wants me to do this, I'm going to do this. I don't get it. In lots of Jewish circles, their way around this is through humor, right? As many Jews is. They'll sit and they'll make fun of whatever the mitzvah is that we're doing while we're doing it, because I don't get it. I don't get why I can't have a linen and wool together, right? Whatever. It seems the same as anything else to me, but this is what Hashem says. Therefore, I don't wear it, right? And we move on. That's a very basic reference. That leads to chachma, right? Imein yira ein chachma. If there is no reverence, if you don't have at least that basic level of submission to Hashem, of discipline to Hashem, of what we'll call in Yiddish ibergegebenkeit, or devotion to following in Hashem's ways, almost no matter what, then you're not going to do that. The moment you don't understand something, you're not going to do it, right? The moment you don't feel like doing it, we don't do it. Today I'm in a bad mood with God, right?
We can be in a bad mood with God.
We can do whatever we want. That's the joy, and that's the fortunate and unfortunate truth is that we're allowed to do whatever we want. So yes, we could definitely be in a bad mood with God. Should we be? No, we should have belief in Hashem that what He's doing is the right thing. But back to the point. So that leads to a basic observance of Hashem, basic observance of Torah and mitzvot. That Torah and mitzvot will help us, as we'll see later in this week's chapter, to attain a higher level of reverence for Hashem. Right? And that's the imein chachma ein yira. If you don't have a proper learning of Torah, if you don't have proper wisdom, then you won't be able to have that higher level of reverence. Okay?
Well, a very unlearned person can also have yira for Hashem.
Of course. But here we're talking about different levels of yira. As we're going to see later in the chapter, if you don't learn Torah, you're going to have a very hard time getting to step 2, or what we'll call, let's say, the highest level of reverence for God, a very deep reverence for God. Can I ask you to be patient? I think I understand what your question is and where you're going with this. This is the topic of today's lesson. Okay? So, what we've now introduced, right? Although we could introduce it in a much simpler way, which is as follows. It's more, I guess, more simply put, there is a spectrum of reverence for Hashem. When we throw out the word yirah, and we say, oh, this person fears Hashem, oh, this person is a very God-fearing person, right? He cares about his Judaism, that's a very general term, and there's a spectrum of, from the very, very basic, very easy to attain, to the very, very intense and very deep level of reverence of Hashem, and obviously throughout our lives, we all aspire to deepen that emotion within us. Okay? And that's, I guess, the main point that the Alter Rebbe is trying to introduce. And that second part is going to come with a lot more meditation than the first part. Right? The first part might be, I get it. The world didn't come from nothing. To me, that's pretty obvious. Step one. Step two, got to be somebody who created the world. Use whatever word you want to describe him or her or it. Step three, if so, then I should probably, I guess step three would be, if so, then he, she, it has some sort of purpose for the world. And step four, if he, she, it has communicated it to me, then I should probably do it. Right? That's the very basic level. A little, to get anything deeper is going to involve a lot of meditation.
And a lot of study.
Well, yeah. I mean, study, meditation, they go hand in hand in Tanya's definition of meditation, right? Mm-hmm. You have to know more about something in order to meditate about it more, in order to reach a more expanded version. Now, one of the things the Alter Rebbe sets down right at the beginning is that this concept that it can be very contracted or very expanded reverence can even be in the lower level of reverence. In other words, even in the yira, which is bringing to Chachma, even in the very basic level of submission to Hashem, which is bringing that we should do Torah and mitzvot, even in that, it can be very contracted, like I just explained it to you, right? It took me 10 seconds to explain it to you. It takes even shorter to think about it. And therefore I do what I'm told to do. That's it. Torah says, hop up and down, I hop up and down. Whatever it is, right? Then a person can flesh it out much more. They can think about how great the world is and how intense it is. One of the cool things, I think we spoke about this last week, is to choose moments or concepts in this world which might affect you on a deeper level, and then reverse engineer them, and that can affect you even deeper. Right? So I think last week we brought the example of a lion. If a person is afraid of a lion for whatever reason, right? And that is what inspires his fear of Hashem or his reverence of Hashem. That might be much more intense than if a person says, oh, Hashem created the lion, and therefore he's greater than the lion, therefore I'm afraid of Hashem. That's much greater than Hashem created this bottle of water, and therefore I'm afraid of Hashem, right? Therefore I revere Hashem. No, that's... and as the Alter Rebbe introduces from the Talmud, the analogy given for the spiritual world is that from the not for the spiritual world, I'm sorry, for the physical world, I'm on the bottom of page 549. I'm going to read now a little bit inside. There's a metaphorical description of the spiritual worlds found in the Talmud, which might form the basis of an expanded mind meditation. Right? It says in the Talmud, in Chagika, you contemplate that a journey from earth to heaven takes 500 years. This is a famous Gemara that lots of people struggle to understand. What does it mean? It takes 500 years to get from earth to heaven? Right? We managed to fly to the moon. Mm-hmm. Right? And is that even the heaven we're talking about, or are we talking about from the physical to the spiritual? So it takes 500 years, doesn't take less, doesn't take more. Like you would think it's not a time constraint thing. Anyways, fine. And the thickness of the heaven is a journey of 500 years. And so too, between each heaven and the one above it, and above them are the holy angels, and the feet of the angels are equal to all of them together, etc. This is a Talmud which is used to describe the greatness and the vastness of the world, right? of creation. The Talmud, however, contains relatively little discussion of the spiritual worlds. Right? But Seder Ishtalshlos, the chain of spiritual worlds, is discussed in great detail in the works of Kabbalah and Chassidus. Right? So, thinking about it on a very physical level might be very, very contracted. And then you might realize, oh, that's all the physical. That could be a springboard for you to realize, oh, there must be much more in the spiritual world. Right? But even this, says the Alter Rebbe, even this would essentially be a very limited form of reverence for God. Why? Because you see, essentially, the difference between a higher reverence and a lower reverence is going to be as follows. A lower reverence from God, we're going to translate as no matter how deep, and no matter how detailed, and no matter how the word he uses is expanded, our meditation is from this world, and we look at things in this world, and we say, therefore, we can understand how great God is. It is essentially still worldly. It is essentially still limited to this physical world. A higher form of meditation would be to realize that we can go a step above this world. In other words, we can realize from this world, right? And this is what in Kabbalistic terms or in meditational terms, Jewish meditational terms, it's called Mimale Kol Almin and Sovev Kol Almin. The way God fills the world and the way that God surrounds the world. You see, the way that God surrounds the world is emblematic of the type of the category of meditation where we say to ourselves, it's not enough. Meaning, I can think of a lion, I can think of ISIS, of a terrorist, of the scariest thing to me in the world. Those are more fears. I can think even of the thing that I revere most in the world. You know, the most awesome, waterfall and power of nature and whatever. I can witness an eclipse and a tsunami and God knows what, right? And even a combination of all of them, and God is higher than all of this, and He makes all of this happen, which should essentially lead to a great awe of the Almighty, right? But all of it is limited in that it's all worldly. It's based on my limited understanding of the world. On a very basic level, we can understand the difference between my level of awe and reverence that I have for Hashem based on this world, compared with, let's say, Albert Einstein's awe and reverence that he has for God based on his meditation of the world. And now let's just multiply it an infinite amount of times to recognize that even Albert Einstein is still limited by the fact that he's reverse engineering a world in order to understand the creator of the world. Right? Let's use the analogy of an artist. When an artist paints a painting, right? And we don't know the artist. Nobody here in this room knows the artist. We bring in his piece of work, and it's magnificent. It's awe-inspiring. It's emotional. Everybody in this room agrees. We're all varying different, levels of connoisseurs of paintings. We all agree it's amazing. And we sit here and we describe, and Jeff is the biggest connoisseur of all of us. And he's there and he'll explain to us on a very high level, and we don't even really get it. And we say, I don't need to get all that. I understand how great the artist must be just based on this painting. Right? And just based on my limited understanding. And Jeff goes, you guys don't even get it. It's like infinitely more deep than you guys are realizing, because I can show you and I can understand that this piece of art is mind-blowing. Right? From the artist's perspective, or even not from the artist's perspective, even from somebody who knows the artist, or from somebody who knows even just multiple works of the artist, we are like these petty little clowns. Here we are in this room with this one piece of work, and we're sitting here and we think we understand who the artist is and what the artist was going through and the emotions and all these things. Even Jeff, who's the biggest connoisseur of all of us, is like a petty little, you don't understand nothing. You never met the artist. You haven't seen any other works of the artist, right? All of a sudden you bring into this room now somebody who is a specialist on this artist. Right? And even that person is still only understanding the artist based on all of the artist's piece of work. Now, I'm not implying that there are multiple universes out there and that maybe there's somebody who knows all the universes and can understand God better than we can. But the point that we are only reaching our understanding of God, right? We can all relate to the fact that when our knowledge of God, when our reverence of God, when our emotions, when our meditation, which gives birth to emotion, is based only on the limited world, on reverse engineering the world. In Yiddish they say, "Was for apanimatas," right? How much could it be already? So how do we get to that higher level of reverence? So in section 2, the Alter Rebbe starts to talk about im ein chachma, ein yira. Right? We got from the first level of basic reverence, we got us to chachma. We got us to chachma, which is wisdom, which refers to the Torah and mitzvot and observing God's Torah and mitzvot. And then we say that from the Torah, if we study the Torah properly, and if utilized the right way in meditation, and meditated upon the right way, that can lead to a higher level of reverence. How does that work? So the first example given, and I want to read this inside. Rabbi Miller brings down here beautifully on page 551 from a different work of the Alter Rebbe, another Hasidic work, which is a Seder Tefillas Mikol Hashana. Essentially a Siddur, a prayer book, but underneath all of the prayers, I don't know if this has ever been translated to English, and I apologize for those of you that don't read Hebrew, because it's a fascinating work. He goes through each of the prayers, and together with each of the prayers, like the regular prayers we pray here in Shul, there's like deep meditations based on Tanya and based on Chassidus that go along together with it. As you can imagine, that would be powerful, right? I mean, I shouldn't say it's not translated to English. There are works that draw a lot from, meaning there are English books which draw a lot from this Siddur and from other works on davening, which have that, whatever. For instance, one of the ones is what we did last year, when we did a lot of the book called My Prayer by Nissen Mendel at our prayer class here in the mornings, on Sunday mornings, which we did over the course of 2017, 2018. Anyways, so over there the Alter Rebbe gives us a little bit more depth into the difference between a lower reverence and a higher reverence. Pam, you want to read for us a little bit?
Where?
On page 551. Think of the difference.
Think of the difference between the way you're impressed by a powerful man and the way you're impressed by a holy man. There are two major distinctions. One, a powerful man impresses you because of what he can do, his influence. A holy man impresses you because of who he is.
Of who he is.
A higher caliber of human being. Being in the presence of a powerful man doesn't really change you, but being in the presence of a holy man might deeply impact your life. When you're impressed with a powerful man, you're not really revering him, but his influence. The thought of all that power may overwhelm you, but it doesn't change you inside. You're the same person as before. You've just encountered someone else who is much more powerful than you. That's like being impressed with the awesomeness of the spiritual worlds, or lower reverence. You're impressed by what God can do, but not by God himself.
Right? Think of
That
the
makes sense.
analogy that we gave of the painting and the painter, right? You're impressed by everything you know about the painter, you only know from the painting. How deep can that be? Right? It's just what God does, not God himself. Go ahead.
At higher reverence, you start to feel the actual presence of God himself, the core godliness within the worlds. You are revering God for who he is and not what he can do. To describe how the experience changes you, higher reverence is also referred to here as reverence from a deep sense of shame. When you are in the presence of a holy man, you begin to question your own inner worth. Yeah, that's true. If another person can be that holy, that refined, what does that say about you? You begin to feel that by this standard, your life's achievements are embarrassing, that if this is what a human being can rise to, then you haven't even begun yet. Similarly, the experience of higher reverence is one of losing your identity in the presence of God. You begin to vacate and transcend yourself. You connect with the reality of God, which leaves no room for any separate existence.
So that's the goal. This is what we're looking to achieve. I think nothing will say it better than the Alter Rebbe does in Siddur Tefillas Mikol Hashana. When you're in the presence of Adam Kadosh, of a holy man, so then all of a sudden you're affected by the person themselves. When you're in the presence of a powerful man, so then you're affected by the things that the person can do, right? How often do I don't know, you see these videos online of people who met the president, right? And then interviews that they do with the news or whatever it is. Very often this line comes up. Are you kidding me? While I was there, I was thinking to myself, this man has the codes to the nuclear bombs. This man, if he presses a button, he can exonerate this person from prison who's been in prison for so many years. How often do you hear people talk about him, who he is?
Rather than what he can do.
I don't want to get into politics at all. And therefore, I'm not going to reference this president or the previous president, right? But they were both of opposing political parties. But pretty much, almost consistently, throughout the years, the president has been looked at as in, there's the president, there's who he is, and then there's what he does. obviously we want the president to be a good role model for our children and for people to look up to him, etc., right? But we've always said that a president is about the effect that he has while he's president. There have been things that in the past the president has done, people bring them up, and people are like, why are you bringing that up? That's not, that's something that he... In other words, we're not so taken about who he is as much about what he does.
Exactly.
In positions of power, I don't know if that was such a great example, but in positions of power in general, in the world, right, kishmai keinu, like they say in Hebrew, like its name, so is it. It's a position of power. The person himself, it's hard to differentiate, right? But take any past president.
Often, may I?
Yeah.
Often, the position that an individual occupies is what we consider to be the man or the person.
Yeah. Okay.
And
perfect.
So we don't make a distinction as to the real person that is behind that or who's occupying that position.
And then all of a sudden we realize it at one point or whatever it is. In other words, this is a bad example, right? But take a former president. Would you feel the same reverence in their presence? Now, the fact of the matter is you still would feel a certain reverence because a certain amount of that power still remains. There's something to being a former president of the United States. They're a man of influence. They're whatever it is, right? Everybody with me here?
Yeah.
But it's all about the influence. It's all about the power.
So
None of it is the person himself. Yeah, go ahead.
in human beings, it's very possible and likely probable to separate behavior from person. But with God, they're inseparable.
Correct. And that is the precise idea here. So with all of them, you're getting to know him. But on what level are you getting to know him? Are you getting to know him like you know somebody who's in a position of power, that has a lot of power?
Trying to humanize.
Well, look, by people, the best example he was able to give you was a person of power and a holy person. A holy person, there's nothing. It has nothing to do with what they could do or what they do. It has to do with who they are. Who they are. Who you see them being. Right? So now we have a goal. We realize that the difference between feeling a reverence for God on a lower level of reverence and feeling a reverence for God on a higher level of reverence, we now know what the difference in that feeling is. We also know how you attain the lower level of reverence. Right? How? Through the world. By recognizing the power of the world, and that could still be contracted or expanded. There's a spectrum of how intense that reverence will be based on how much you meditate via the world. But how do we get to this higher level of actually revering God himself? Not just God through his actions, but God himself, feeling the presence of God himself.
I have a question.
1 second. So to this, the answer of Pirkei Avot is Im ein chachma ein yira. We have to turn to chachma. Chachma is going to help us get to this higher level of yira, to this higher level of reverence. Wisdom, whatever wisdom is, and that's what we're going to spend the next section doing, is going to help us get there. Yes, your question.
In the last paragraph, it says, when you connect with the reality of God, it leaves no room for any other separate existence.
So
the difference between the levels of Yirah is how much you understand this thing, that there is nothing but God. If you still see the world as separate, then you are not on the high level. The goal is that we all understand there is no separate existence outside of God.
Okay, I think, I would agree with you about that, but I think that much more importantly what the Alter Rebbe is trying to stress with that second point, which is, and I think, and help me out here, it's a discussion, I think that the Alter Rebbe is trying to emphasize the effect, the difference in effect that it would have on the person. He's talking about the words, the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur is referencing the words that he uses here in Tanya, at the bottom of page 550, you can see it, so you can see it. Achayira ila yirei boshet. High reverence is a reverence arising from a sense of shame in God's presence. He's trying to explain to you what the difference in effect will be on you when you are in Hashem's presence. In other words, when you have this yira ilah, when you have this higher level of reverence, or when you have a lower level of reverence. When you have a lower level of reverence, it results in a very basic response. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. Okay, I get it. Hashem is greater than me. I'm going to do what he says. That's it. I do it. I do what Hashem says. You still exist. You're just submitted to God. You're foregoing on your own existence because you believe that Hashem is greater, and that's pretty much it.
It's almost mechanical.
It's not mechanical at all, but it's very basic. It's very 1 + 1 = 2, and that's it. It's very technical, I guess. But the higher level of reverence impacts you because you're actually understanding God, or you're not understanding God is a bad word.
It's a very good word.
No,
Understanding
it's not true. It's not true. We're not understanding God. We're recognizing how much higher. The best word, in fact, would be we're recognizing how much we don't understand God. That's what we're doing.
So doesn't that pull us
What
out
happens,
of it?
exactly. So what happens is, all of a sudden, it stops to be, therefore, I must submit myself entirely. Instead, the reaction is, therefore, I don't even exist. That's the reaction. Very different reaction. That's why there's this sense of shame.
I don't exist as a mortal being
I don't even exist.
because there's nothing but God.
God is so awesome that I'm just, so that's why I said to me, you're right, I'm just part of him. Like, I'm not,
That's right.
like, who am I even like to...
That sounds like the middle phase. If you're
Okay, listening.
cognizant enough to be thinking and compared to God, I'm nothing. That's like a middle ground. But when you lose that thought and
Okay.
you have only awe, that's maybe a little higher.
Okay, fine. But now, I think now you're splitting hairs. In other words, it's all part of that process of getting to higher reverence. The goal is what we're talking about more importantly. In other words, similarly, the experience of higher reverence is one of losing your identity in the presence of Hashem. You begin to vacate and transcend yourself. You connect with the reality of God, which leaves no room for any other separate existences. Thank you, Irit, for encouraging us to stress that second point.
I don't
Okay.
think I've ever reached that level yet.
So how do we get there? Yira Ilah is a very, very hard level
You
to
get
achieve.
acupuncture. No, seriously, it really
You're teaching Chassidus while you drive?
just happened.
What's going on?
It just
Is there a
happened.
secret Chassidus class, a breakaway from the PJA happening at Potter Acupuncture?
Special
No,
needles?
but even without it, it just your just body gets aligned better.
We should definitely do
I
that.
think
No,
the same
Irit, you
happens
think we
with
could partner?
chiropractic.
Irit, you think we could partner?
When your body
You'll
is-
poke the needles. I'll give a Tanya class. By the time people come
Oh,
out,
I'm in
they'll
for
be
that.
physically and spiritually cleansed.
I like that idea.
And you'll put it all together for us legally, right?
Catherine, what's going on here? Her eyes are
And Catherine, right? You're also there, right?
Both of you, yeah.
I didn't do that much acupuncture, but I don't know how. It seems like it's influenced you a lot. It seems like you are well, I don't know.
Okay, so this, by the way, believe it or not, figuring out how to get there, which is all tied, as we know, in Chachma, is actually going to be a lot simpler than, meaning it's going to be very hard to do, but it's going to be a lot simpler to explain. Chachma, as we know already, right, is koach ma. The word Chachma is made of the words koach ma, which means what is this energy? In other words, Chachma is by the way, I think his best way of translating Chachma is actually not even wisdom. I think he usually translates, let me see if I can find it. I think he usually uses the word inquiry.
What page are you on?
He's trying to find it.
I'm on page 552. Anyways,
The word literally
here he
means
just uses
from
the word
where?
Chachma over and over again. What?
The
No, the
word-
word Chachma means wisdom. Koach ma, these two words are, Koach means energy and ma means what, as if what is this energy? And there is a famous quote from Job, who says, Chachma me'ayin timatze. The Chachma comes from where? And the Kabbalists explain that is not a question, it's an answer. Chachma comes from where? It comes from asking the question, from where is it? Chachma is inquiry. Chachma is this absolute curiosity of like,
It's the highest meditation.
what is even higher than me?
What am I?
What am I? Exactly.
What's
And the what?
a bina means just the blue.
Bina is fleshing it out as meditation. Normal meditation is bina. 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4, I'm working it out, I'm fleshing it out, I'm thinking about it a lot. There's a lot of thoughts going on in my mind. Chachma, there's very little thought going on in my mind. I'm actually looking for new thoughts to come into my mind. I'm looking for sources of other things that might be higher than me.
And
Might be higher than my existence. That's
Bina
Chachma.
Chachma, what's
Dat is the last one. We discussed that at length a couple
is
weeks ago.
higher?
That is the connection between us and between the emotions and the intellect, between us and God. For that's for a different week. But talking about Chachma, right? So Chachma is the realization, as Yuri was saying beforehand, that the world is constantly being recreated by God. Right? The Baal Shem Tov famously says on the pasuk, which says "La'olam Hashem Dvar Chanitza B'Shamayim," that forever God, your words stand in the heaven. Right? And the Baal Shem Tov translates that as the words that created the world to begin with, because we know that God spoke the world into existence, are constantly standing in the heavens, and they're recreating the world at every moment. In other words, the world is such a fragile existence that it literally has to be recreated at every moment. Take it easy. It's been around for a couple thousand years. It's going to stay. Don't worry. She's like nervous. She's like, I don't know. What if it disappears? All my security and my safety. What?
So big.
Yeah, it's true. It is such an awesome guy. But see, this feeling you're starting to have is not higher reverence. Don't worry about it. But it's the beginning of higher reverence. Recognizing that fragility, recognizing the fact that the world is essentially just breaths of God. The truth of the source of the world is higher reverence. That inspires a higher reverence, a realization that this is all really nothing. So the lower reverence was reaffirming the existence of the world. Oh wow, if the lion is so strong, if the waterfall is so great, if the person is so powerful, and God created all of them, then oh wow, how great must God be? The highest level you can get of that reverence is low compared to the actual recognition that is nothing. That is all nothing, and that this all must be much higher than that. It's also the hardest to do. I'll never forget that when I was in Venezuela for a year, the Maimarim that we chose to learn, the Chassidus that we were learning at that point was from the Rebbe Rashab, which is the 5th Chabad Rebbe. And he has a series of discourses called Achodesh as part of Tafresh Shamach, which is a famous year in which he elaborated a lot of things. And he elaborates on, the whole series, you have to throw everything out the world. Because normally when we discuss Chassidus, everything starts in the world and we're reverse engineering. And in this Maimer, and even if we're talking about the contraction, the diminishment, and all these high levels, it's all focused around things that we can actually are tangible to us, or that we can at least relate to, etc. And in that Maimer, I remember the Rebbe Rashab was talking about everything was pre-Tzimtzum. So if you had to make a distinction between two levels of godliness, you couldn't say, oh, this one is a little more of a physical one, this one, nothing could be physical up there. You couldn't even say it's a spiritual, you couldn't even say it's two levels, because this is all pre-levels. So it had to be, we were splitting hairs in like different types of potential for things that come down later. It was like so subtle, the differences, right? That's higher reverence. Higher reverence is when you realize that all this that we talk about is essentially nothing. And we have to get above that, where we have no knowledge. And that's what Torah does to us. The only way to tie into such a high level of godliness, because we literally just don't have access to it, because the world doesn't allow us access to it, is how we have to take some sort of, all the sci-fi nerds in here, help me out here, some sort of like portal, or some sort of, time warp or something. We have to find something which by its very nature transports us to that world. You understand what I'm saying? And then we can start to meditate there. How can we ever claim to relate to something which is way above not just us, but our entire existence? Only Torah Mitzvah can give that to us. Because Torah Mitzvah is the will of God. It is the wisdom of God. It is God himself, as we've discussed in the past, because God's will and God's wisdom are not separate from himself. So Torah and Mitzvah can transport us and allow us to start to meditate about these types of things. Can we have lots of meditation? No. But the Torah and Mitzvah can help us access that. Does that make sense now? So that's what we mean when we say that. Yeah, sure. I use whatever word you use. I just used portal or whatever. Right. I'm not starting a new Star Wars. Don't worry.
Right.
Okay. Now let us turn our attention to love. So also when it comes to love, there's also two distinct levels. Ava Rabba and Avat Olam. These two words come from our prayers. Every day in our prayers we say, what?
Love of Father and love of the world.
Ava Rabba means a great love, and Avat Olam means worldly love. Not necessarily.
Worldly is not the right
Both of
translation.
these are talking about Avat Olam, meaning everlasting love is the word you would use, right?
Yeah, worldly is more simple.
100%. So the difference between these two is going to be similar to the difference between to the distinction between, or the differentiation between a higher reverence and a lower reverence. Again, Ava Rabba, right? A pleasurable love, a great love, which the Alter Rebbe calls a pleasurable love, like a love that we have from something that gives us pleasure, is always a love from something that you have already, right? I want you to think about the difference between that. Most loves that we have in this world are actually for things that we don't have yet, believe it or not, right? We'll call it a yearning for something, a desire for something. I've heard so much about it, I love it so much. Usually when we have something, we don't love it so much, right? Distance makes the heart grow fonder, this kind of thing. With the exception of a few things, sometimes we have this feeling, children is a good example, right? With our children, the more that they're with us, somehow we have this feeling of like this pleasure that we take in our children, this nachas that we take in our children, this love that we feel for our children by being in their presence. Essentially, to have such a love for godliness, one has to actually be experiencing godliness. Now, the good news is, this is actually given to us as an inheritance from our forefathers, who were in the presence of Hashem. As we know that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were called the Merkava, like a chariot for God. Just like a chariot doesn't have a desire of its own, it just does what its rider wants. So too, our forefathers only did what Hashem wanted. And this love is passed on to every single one of us, and it can be fanned into a flame. The deal is, though, it needs to be preceded by higher reverence. You need to attain that level of actually that feeling of awesomeness, and you'll see the parallels between the higher reverence and the higher love. This Ava Rabba, or a pleasurable love for God, of being in God's presence, is very synonymous with what we just explained about a higher reverence, right? About being in the presence of Hashem, not understanding Hashem through things that Hashem created in this world, but being in the presence of Hashem. The second level of Ava, of love for God, is a much lower level. That's what we call a worldly love. Why? It can be attained very simply through effort. And this love, as its name implies, comes through meditating on God filling the entire world. Wow, God fills the entire world. And the Alter Rebbe actually gives us a little bit of, like we say, some words, some tangibility here for it. On page 558. We're actually going to skip the part where Rabbi Miller goes off topic a little bit. But the Alter Rebbe starts says, Ach Avat only says, however, the lower level of worldly love can be acquired through your efforts. It's not a gift from God, and it doesn't require you to reach higher reverence. Worldly love, as its name suggests, is a longing for God that you can acquire through your knowledge of the world. It's also called worldly love because anyone in the world can merit it if he chooses to, which is what the Shnei Luchot HaBrit says. And it results from meditation on the greatness of the blessed infinite light, as it can be known through the world using Bina and Das. Okay, so here he goes off topic a little bit to explain the differences between Bina and Das, and I encourage you to read that in your own time. But moving down to the bottom of page 558, to acquire worldly love, first you contemplate with Bina and Das how God fills all worlds, that God is the inner energy of every single thing in the world, in the universe, which He creates continually. And that will eventually lead you to the realization that God transcends all worlds, and God's created energies within the world are vastly surpassed by His energies beyond the world. And this will lead you to the realization that in His presence everything is considered zero. Even the awareness that God fills all worlds and transcends all worlds is ultimately based on a dualism of God versus world. But in the non-dual consciousness that the Tanya has taught us in chapters 20-21, there's only one reality: God. Everything else is considered zero in His presence. And now the Alter Rebbe reminds us of this. But then, go down a little lower, and this above meditation will instinctively cause the love in your soul to strip off her prior garments, to detach herself from the things she loved before. Meaning that your soul will not attach itself to love and pleasure, delight in physical or even spiritual, and won't desire anything in the world at all. You see, and this is where we really get to the point here. You're drawn to love something based on your evaluation that it's good. Physical pleasures, which are usually what we have a love for and what we enjoy, make you feel good, so you desire it. Knowledge helps you to make sense of the world, so you want it. That rule never changes. You will always love what you deem to be good, but you can challenge your assumptions of what constitutes good and transfer your love to something more valuable. So our goal, at least through Avat Olam, through this lower level of worldly love for God, is to figure out a way not to have a deeper love than we usually have, to have the same type of love that we usually have for anything in this world, but to transfer that love and have that kind of love, instead of for something physical, instead of for jelly beans and Mike and Ike's, to have it for God. For example, you might love eating ice cream and cake every day, but when you ponder the fact that it will probably make you sick and shorten your life, you can reprogram yourself to genuinely desire a more healthy diet. You supplant the desire for immediate sensual pleasure and greater desire with the greater desire for healthy and long life. So did you change the depth of your love? No, you just love living more than you love ice cream. Right? Go even more intense than this, right? A person loves fatty foods, and then he finds out that this is literally, the doctor says, if you continue to eat fatty foods, it's going to affect your cholesterol and your this and whatever, your blood pressure and all these things, and you have to stop, otherwise you're literally going to die. I guarantee it, right? The doctor says. Does that mean that this person now has a deeper love? No, he just managed to move. He transplanted that love with a love for something else. Similarly, the Tanya promises that you can come to love God through a meditative practice which devalues the world and its pleasures through the awareness of God's will as something even more desirable. Right? And this is a lower level of love for God. And eventually that can lead to a higher level of loving God, which is a pleasurable love where you literally feel like you're in God's presence itself. Okay, we good so far? Mm-hmm. And finally, in section 5, all the way at the end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe reminds us why it's so important for observance, for Torah observance, for keeping Torah and mitzvah to come before love. Right? As the Mishnah says, and we said that in order to have a proper Ava, you need to have Yira. Why? Now, Alter Rebbe reminds us that in order to have such a love for God, it doesn't need to be preceded by reverence. Love doesn't need to be preceded by reverence, but it's very unusual that it shouldn't be preceded by reverence. At least a tiny bit of reverence, even if that reverence is embedded within that love. Just as a small parenthetical, I will reference back to the analogy that I've given over and over again of a spousal relationship where the love and the respect are very much intertwined with each other. End parentheses. Usually, before you can develop a proper love for Hashem, I love Hashem because before that comes a basic acceptance of God is the ruler of the universe. And therefore I have to listen to what he says. And that brings about observance. And that observance, that Torah and mitzvot, usually is what inspires like a feeling of love, which goes hand in hand with that observance of Hashem. So to summarize, both love and fear of the Almighty, Av and Yira, love and reverence, are spectrums. And you can throughout your life have a greater or lesser love or reverence for Hashem. And that is our job throughout our lives, right? We constantly have to love Hashem and fear Hashem, but with the present or the gift of Chassidus, of learning Chassidus, comes a much greater responsibility. We can't get away with it anymore. Now that you know that there's a higher level of loving God, when you have a more basic and simple level of loving God, it doesn't feel as fulfilling, right? The same thing with reverence. And these levels follow this chain of succession where the more we meditate, the more we revere God, the more we serve God, the more we have the ability to revere Him more. And the same thing with love. The more we love God, therefore the more we're going to do what He says, Therefore, the more that can inspire more of a love for God. With this, we'll conclude Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 43, on the path to reverence. I actually think that's not the name of this week's chapter. That's what it says on the handout, but I think that's a typo. Yeah, the full spectrum of reverence and love. That's the problem.